Save. Alright, there we go.
Ah, it's so hot. I need to put my hair up. It's just too much.
It's nice here. It's like a little bit cloudy. I actually thought it was gonna rain before we went live. We checked the radar and it
That
was
might
like
have been nice, huh?
a 50% chance, but it didn't rain. It went right past us. Right past us.
Goodness.
Sorry about it. I ended up not sitting in the van because it is hot. I was like, I'm gonna go sit outside where it's cooler. But I can't imagine how hot it is. What's the temperature today down there in Kansas?
It's 90.
Yeah.
Like, that's what the thermometer says. My tablet says 90.
I think it's like 70 here. Like,
Yeah.
not too bad, but it's hot in the van still.
Oh, yeah, I bet that's an oven.
It's nice when we're at their property, we can open all the doors and put
Yeah.
a button in it. But we're in the Dollar General parking lot. Can't exactly do that. We got kicked out of the lot. We go to do laundry right across the street, like from the Dollar General. And we usually park there sometimes just to, like, just do stuff on our phone. And so that's where we're going to go live today. And some guy came out and he was like, my boss he doesn't want anyone sitting here unless they're doing laundry. And we were like, what? Like the empty parking lot. There's one person in this parking lot.
Like, no one's there to begin with?
Yeah. And we're like, what do you mean? Like, we do our laundry here. We're just not doing it right now, like today. But we do our laundry here.
I mean, I get being like that if your parking lot is busy and you don't have room
Yeah.
for
We don't want to clog up
or
anyone.
if you were scaring people from parking there, but I don't see that being the case.
It was weird. It's been like that here, and it's Minnesota, so they're all very nice about it. I'm really sorry, but you really can't. I mean, you really can't stay here. It's like, I don't know if you're that sorry.
Well, we was going to discuss a little bit about the history of the female hobo,
Yes.
and I thought I brought some notes. I used OneNote. I don't know if anybody else uses that. It's like a Microsoft thing, but I used the crap out of it. But I brought some notes with me. I have a bunch of different ideas of different things that we can talk about when it comes to that kind of history. But I figured I would just ask you, like, what kind of stuff is interesting to you when it comes to that kind of history, and what do you want to make sure that we talk about?
Well, I think I always enjoyed talking about the crossover of, like, female hobos who were cowgirls. And also, I think that always is very interesting. And recently we were talking about how you said, like, it would be really fun. I know you haven't researched much about it now, but about, females who might have done burlesque or pinup and stuff like that, and also rid the rails to get to, whatever show or, venues going to go to.
Hey, thanks, Faywitch. I've started to compile a list of burlesque, individuals from the rails at that time. And I think that there's enough stuff there that maybe we should talk about that all on an episode of this by itself, because there's just so much cool stuff to talk about. And then this will give people a base history as they're going into that kind of stuff to understand why things were the way that they were.
Yeah, because you told me something about the pins and needles, and I was just like, oh, I'm so excited. I still haven't listened to any of those songs that you sent me, because I haven't had time to. But I need to.
You'll find some time, I'm sure.
I will. I'll have to.
Yeah, so when we talk about the history of the female hobo, for the most part, female hobos were written out of history. You have to dig pretty hard to find those stories, especially the further back you go. And so when we talk about the height of what is the height of the American hobo, we also have to remember it is not so much the Great Depression that we put in our brain. Hey, there's anyone, man. High five. But it is actually earlier than that, between like the Civil War and up through the Great Depression. You know, it encompasses a lot more, and it encompasses the same time as the Buffalo Bill Cody shows, or that Wyatt Earp was also, um, you know, being a sheriff. You know, those time periods coincide. They are one and the same, and so yeah, there's a ton of crossover there.
Yeah, a lot of
Um,
people don't think about that, and I think it's really interesting, especially when you talked about it, how there is like a lot of connection in between, and a lot of people don't think anything like, oh yeah, hobo and cowgirl or cowboy that didn't even come close to each other. It's like actually they were mixed together. They were people who were cowboys and cowgirls fighting the rails.
Well, you know, and somebody asked, I just saw in the comments, where'd that comment go? So, like, did hobos travel with children? You know, and so we're talking about female hobos here. The makeup of what kind of woman, of you know the types of folks that were on the rails changed generation to generation. We're spanning several generations here, you know, so it's not just one big monolith. So the further back you go, the more hidden women are on the rails. It would have been very dangerous to travel with children at that time as a woman. Directly after the Civil War, you had some displaced individuals that, of course, were traveling with children because they were displaced. But for the most part, a lot of women, and especially white women, were traveling alone because they had to disguise themselves very often. There were a lot of laws against women being alone by themselves, traveling in that way, so on and so forth. A lot of strict vagrancy laws that were gendered.
I'm sure the Dust Bowl that was a little bit common too for them to travel with a child to get out of the
Right,
dust.
right. We're getting to that because the makeup of the rails drastically changes from one generation to another. You know, and this kind of hidden female element lasted, you know, up until about World War One, right? Up until about World War One, and you kind of started seeing some women being bold a little bit before. So a lot more radically charged women being a little bit bolder a little bit before that. But but as far as like when they would do statistics and homeless counts, they would not even there wasn't even a column for women. Like they didn't even count women. It was just such a minute amount of folks in their minds that it wasn't worth it to count that. And so those statistics don't even exist. They just don't exist. And a lot of the things, the relief that was given to men was not given to women. You know, so you couldn't stand in line at some bread lines. They expected the head of the household to do that, right? And so if you weren't a man, they wouldn't give you food. They were like, well, get your husband to come back in some of these spots. You know, and so it was really hard for women to travel, um, in comparison to men for a handful of different reasons. You know, and then once the World War One hit, you had a bunch of women joining the workforce, and there was this new kind of idea of what womanhood was and what women could do, and this idea that women could be in those male roles doing those male jobs, you know, as they did when soldiers went to war. And so because of that, you started seeing more women outwardly being women on the rails. You know what I mean? More folks that they weren't hiding it so much. You know, many of them were still dressing as men traveling, but you know there was less of the stigma around it, in compared to like right at the turn of the century.
Yeah,
You
I've
know,
had times I've had people be like, "Sir," on the road because I wear like more, just shorts and stuff that doesn't So don't get bothered as much, on the road. I still see it, today with a lot of
Right.
traffic.
And at that time you still wouldn't see that many like smaller children on the rails, maybe some older children you might see on the rails. Because young boys would go hopping freight
Right.
fairly young. You hear stories about little boys hitting the road super, super young. And but as far as like children, not a lot of like women traveling with children then. That wholeheartedly changed though once the Great Depression hit. Because then you had the time of whole families hitting the road at once together. Whole families being in boxcars, hitting the hobo jungles. We talk about Hoovervilles, which were, President Hoover had set up these,
Mm.
you know, camps for the unhoused in different places. I don't even think there's a number of how many of these Hoovervilles existed. But you were either in a Hooverville or you were camping out in the hobo jungle. You know, so I mean, throughout time, the idea of like what kind of women were on the rails and how it was viewed and the laws around it changed really drastically, um, from decade to decade.
Yeah, I think a lot about like the Dust Bowl because I had an album I downloaded from Woody Guthrie, and he's doing like a show, and there's this lady I can't remember her name, but she's asking him a bunch of questions, and he just loves rambling. You know anything about Woody Guthrie? Like he loved just like you asked him a question, and he would answer it so in depth and just like keep talking about it. And so I've listened to that, and every time I still listen to the song and it comes on and Tim rambling, I'll listen to the ramble about the Dust Bowl. And it's always very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, there were a lot of displaced individuals at the time, and there was a lot of resentment
Yeah.
too against people that were riding the rails, families, so on and so forth. And a lot of, again, just like earlier female hobos, women were excluded from a lot of the New Deal policies and stuff when it came to try to pull people out of the Great Depression. They were completely excluded. It was the same. You got in a bread line, they'd be like, well, send the head of the household. A lot of work programs were just for men. A lot of housing programs were just for men and then their families, if they had families. There wasn't anything, you know, for women like that. I mean, they were just kind of looked over. And so you had a lot of really resilient folks, throughout all of American history. A lot of really resilient women that were on the rails and on the street, so to speak. And a lot of different pieces of culture, a lot of really cool pieces of culture. Because just like you were talking about the music that was attached to it, that was attached to hobo culture in general, but like even like the early blues scene, you had people like Memphis Minnie used to ride rails, and and she was a street performer, and she did real well, and she would travel around with this traveling circus kind of thing, and then she would ride rails into town and pick up gigs. And just as an example, there are a lot of floaters, a lot of floaters.
Yeah, I was telling Les, I was like, y'all should do a live together about traveling musicians. That'd be a cool one to do.
Yeah, one about traveling musicians would be interesting. It would be nice to start with Harry McClintock.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, there's so many out there. It'd be really fun.
yeah, yeah. You know, as far as like female travelers were concerned too. So like when newspapers and especially the further back you went, when they would find a female hobo, it would sometimes make first page news. It would be a huge deal. They would do articles and follow up articles about it, because it was considered this rare thing. And so some of that propaganda was used to fuel a lot of fears and conspiracy theories that were kind of running around. There's something called the white slavery panic going on. And we're talking about like 1905 up through like World War I or so. And the white slavery panic was this weird moral panic, and where people were making these sensational claims that like criminal syndicates on the street were kidnapping specifically white women and trafficking them, forcing them into, doing stuff against their will. I have to watch what I'm saying on this app. And they were especially worried about rural girls, rural white girls, of course, and they were especially, they especially targeted like Italian folks, Chinese folks, and immigrants in general, Jewish folks, and blamed them. They said, it's the Japanese syndicate, it's the Chinese syndicate, it's the Italian syndicate. Even though none of those things were a thing, but this was called the white slavery panic, and it actually ended up landing because of this panic. There ended up being other laws put into place, which is one of the reasons that I hate conspiracy theories so much, is because they're used to justify some really awful things throughout history. So I'm fascinated by conspiracy theories, but I hate them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So do you remember us talking about, I think I talked to you about this book called The Trials of Nina McCall?
I think I remember hearing about it. I might have forgotten though.
All right, well, here's the book cover again in case somebody wants to write it down. But this is the only book I know that really discusses something called the America Plan. And the America Plan was a World War I era, set of laws that targeted women in a very extreme way. And it was kind of fueled by that white slavery panic that I was just talking about. And so what it was that it was a way to combat venereal disease against soldiers. And so especially, hey Mima, especially if you were near like a military base of any sort, but generally anywhere, but especially if you were near a military base, if you were a woman walking alone, traveling alone, hell, you could just be eating dinner alone, or your husband could call you in and say that you're suspicious, and they would pick you up and make you undergo all these forced examinations, trying to figure this out. Some people even went through forced sterilization because of this, some women. And, it was all to combat venereal disease. It was actually America's largest forced quarantine in history. But we don't talk about it much because, you know what I mean? Hey, thanks, Brenda. But yeah, this book is one woman's journey through that whole ordeal. And a lot of those laws were written gender neutral. They were written gender neutral, but for the most part, they were only used against women. Like, and I looked and I looked and I looked. I could not. The only times that I ever found those laws, in at least for me looking, used against men was if, against some kind of labor agitator or something like that. They were just trying to poke on unions and using that as something to top it off. So, what was the book? The Trials of Nina McCall. Yeah, so the America Plan was something that really, really affected travelers at the time, and especially if you were black and brown, you risked being picked up. And there was a huge difference between the way that a white lady traveling, a white hobo, a female hobo, would be treated, and a black female hobo. Um, and so, like, and this is a good example of what I'm talking about. Let's say that we have two different cases, and let's say they're both the same age. They're 23 years old, and they commit the same crime. They pocket some candy at a general store. They would take the white female hobo, and they would very often put her into something called an industrial school, and they're going to try to teach her how to type, how to do embroidery, kind of like try to get her more feminized. They're not going to allow her to dress in men's clothes, and she'd be court ordered there, that kind of thing. But and this happened to younger women. If you're older, then you risk going to jail or the insane asylum.
Yeah.
But for a black woman, they would stick her on the rock pile, and that black woman could be pregnant, visibly pregnant, and they would still put her on the rock pile. And so a huge difference in the way that women were treated, even amongst the homeless women. And so that needs to be recognized.
Oh yeah.
Because it was really, really hard for a lot of those folks, and that's one of the reasons that you don't see a ton of stories about black and brown women on the rails, and especially earlier on, because they were hiding, and they were hiding hard if they were on the rails. So it just was what it was. Does anybody have any questions or something? Let me know. So I have another book here, and I don't have the dust jacket for this one. But one thing, that I was saying, that there's a huge difference between the way that white and black folks were treated, right? And so there's this author, and her name is Nancy Eisenberg, and she wrote this book that's called White Trash, right? And she's an amazing historian, and she talks about what it was like for poor white people specifically, and makes that difference. I've heard her talk. She talks a lot about why it's so important to teach Black history, because there was such a difference between the two. You know what I mean? It's real important to keep those lessons alive, because they are separate histories, even though they're intertwined. But yeah, she did an amazing job. If you're into reading history books, her name is Nancy Eisenberg. You saw it at a local bookstore. I think it's great. The rock pile, so that's a metaphor, and where sometimes it would literally mean making you break rocks for gravel, right? Hey, thanks, Indigo. But usually in whatever town you're at, they'll have some kind of public works project, and that's where they would send folks if you got in trouble at the jail. So let's say you got picked up for vagrancy, they might put you 3 days on the rock pile, which meant you were going to go over to where they're breaking up rocks to build the road up the street, and you're going to break up rocks, meaning being put on the rock pile. But it was used as a metaphor just for like being put on whatever public works program or project was happening in that area that they were putting convicts on. Sometimes state projects, sometimes county projects, it just kind of depended. City projects depended on the jail. And that was a real common practice for a really long, in fact, it's still a practice. They still use convicts to go pick up trash on the side of the highway. They're just not doing the same types of manual labor. Um, in fact, that's how a huge amount of the portion of the railroad itself was built, and some of our very early highway system was built through convict labor. How long did I ride the rail? Oh, 10 years. There's plenty of folks who have been, riding longer than me. I'm one of many. Four-leaf clover. Abby, what's your Cash App? I have all those links, and I have a link tree thing in the bio thing on here.
In the bio there.
Yeah. Natty Gann? Yeah. There's a couple. Okay, so back in the day, there was a book written called Car Bertha, and I've talked about this book before. Right, and Car Bertha was written by a man, but his name was Ben Rittman, right? And he's the hobo doctor. They used to make jokes at him, and they called him the clap doctor, the most vulgar man in America. But he wanted to teach people about venereal disease, birth control, natural birth control, all that kind of stuff. How to protect yourself, proper family planning, all that kind of things. And he was arrested over and over and over and over again for it. But he wrote this book, and he would work with sex workers and hobos to, as a doctor, you know what I mean, in cities, especially in Chicago. But this book, Boxcar Bertha, was actually, which it says an autobiography, but it's actually ghost written by Ben Rittman, and it's based off of his patients. So we're talking about, turn of the century there, early 1900s, teens, 20s. So his patients, and there's lots of politics in this book. Somebody did make it into a movie in the 70s. The movie is awful and hard to watch, and it is nothing like the book. So don't watch the movie and think that you know what this book is about, because that's not what the end result would be. You know what I mean? But honestly, it's the closest thing that we have as like a real kind of account of what it was like for a woman during that specific time. There's not a lot of first-hand accounts of women writing back then, like self-written accounts. Those are few and far between. Do people still ride the rails? Yes, I used to. That's an actual hobo. Real life in the flesh.
Well, we temporarily live in the van and then also ride the rails now. But when we were staying with Abby, we ended up getting a van, so we part-time still ride the rails, and now live in the van as well. But yeah.
And we just had Anywhere Man in here. I don't know if he's still hanging out, but he's a great hobo to follow. He still hops on and off the big steel once in a while. You know what I mean?
And it's funny if you think about it, actual hobos, not in the way that, rubber tramping and that way, but would do similar stuff. I think it's funny how a lot of people think of hobos as constantly on the rails, never stops, that's how it was. But it's a lot of times they would be in a place for a while and work and, maybe grew some roots there, and then they would hop a train again. So it's very interesting that, people's expectations that hobos were always on the rods. They never left.
Oh yeah, this is Railcar Rosie.
A watercolor artist.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we just had Anywhere Man in here, but I think he ran off.
Yeah, we have I don't think Les was in here, but Les as well. He's a musician who's rode the rides. Well, we don't quite ride rides anymore. But
Yeah. You know, so other kind of things that I think they're kind of interesting to talk about from that part of life, like right, especially right there at the turn of the century, is you have a lot of radicalism on the rails, and there's a handful of folks, like traveling folks, hobo folks or whatnot, that you would catch being thought of as spies, as far as like for unions, hanging out amongst the men, doing that kind of stuff, trying to get info and what the police were going to be doing, and kind of this whole cat and mouse kind of thing. Because a lot of women would be unsuspecting. You would be more suspecting of a man walking into a situation like that. Hey, thanks, Jan. So there's some cool stuff kind of going on there. Um, as far as like the whole cat and mouse game of union and boss, which I thought was interesting. And there were a handful of IWW leaders that, of course, were women. But not all of them, rode rails specifically, you know what I mean? But a lot of them were absolutely, um, you know, uh, inspirational to those hobo women. They would get so excited when they would hear about people like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn showing up, things like that. Um, you know what I mean? And, when we're talking about a population that is few and far between and extremely male dominated, also, you know what I mean? So it's extremely difficult to find those first-hand accounts, and very often, since a lot of times when you would get picked up and be put in jail, they wouldn't, strip search you or whatever, they would just put you in a holding cell or stick you out in a rock pile, and then that'd be it. Whereas now you go put in jail, they're gonna strip search you no matter what. But back then they wouldn't, and so women would get arrested as men under false names and be spit back out without anybody ever knowing that they were women. And so it makes it real hard to trace these women from place to place, unless they keep like a specific alias, and even then that's difficult.
yeah.
Because a lot of them would have, their traveling alias or whatever it was. Like we talked about Clyde Dixon, right?
Oh, I'm not good with names. Maybe.
I'm gonna go find this file so I can show you a picture of her. But Clyde Dixon was a gal that I started kind of poking around at, because I found her story hilarious. It shows her getting picked up by the police when she was, in Texas, right? And she's dressed in male's clothing, and she apparently has a mouth on her, and she goes to put her feet up, on the desk of the jailer, and the jailer notices that that this person has very, very tiny feet. Thanks, Mimo. And so figures out that this is not a man, but a woman, right? Because of the size of this person's feet, right? It finally clicks, right? And then you find an article. I made a file for her, but then I find an article where she's picked up by police, and she's wearing men's shoes several sizes too big, which made me chuckle, right? And then I dig deeper, and I find this story where she's running around, hooping and hollering in a stolen carriage around downtown Fort Worth, right? And they've stolen this carriage, and she is pulled over and stopped by the police, and it's her and several other women dressed as men, right? In this carriage. And they're, hooping and hollering and breaking stuff going around. And they arrest them, put them in the jail, right? Take them in. They tie up this carriage outside of the jail, go back out, and some other hobo had done stolen the carriage again before they could even get to the carriage and return it to its owner. It just, to me, it was gold. The whole thing was gold. You know what I mean? But yeah, she was talking about, her time on the rails and whatnot, and I thought it was great, But she was very, 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 very consistent with her nicknames, And there are a lot of these women that today, were that language to exist back then. Back then, it's historical, She in private correspondence referred to herself as a woman, and so thus do I, but there's no telling if in today's society were she to consider her, to use those pronouns or not. There's no way of knowing that, and so I just go with the pronouns that she used at the time. So that's what I've kind of learned to do.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is ahistorical for the time. You know what I mean? And there are plenty of these gals who maybe would have fallen under that umbrella.
Definitely.
Very easily. I found this one gal, Virginia Stouffer. I have these folders of random women.
Oh, speaking of folders, I got something to show you after you show us that.
This gal, these are my little handwritten notes on the side here. This gal, she had left her home. God, it had to have been 1919? No, earlier than that. Yeah, 1919. She left her home. I was right. But she left with her boyfriend because she wanted her fiance, and they were going to get married and then go hop trains, and he was going to go get a job in an auto plant in Detroit. And, they were taking off from Colorado. And so this was their goal, right? But then as the articles go on, right, and I kept searching and searching and searching for her. As the articles go on, they catch back up with him, and and she's like, oh, well, he hadn't found a job yet at one point, the papers are still kind of following her, and then she kind of drops off the face of the earth for a few months. And all of a sudden, she shows back up in New Mexico in a stolen car. She's done crossed state lines in a stolen car, and I guess they had robbed some kind of mail truck or something like that, and it's her and these five men, and they pull them into town, and this is what I'm saying, like, women were treated very differently than men, but she they tell her, okay, look, we need you to testify for us against these men. And part of this is this brainwashing from the white slavery panic. They're thinking, oh, she must have been kidnapped. Oh, right. So it's part of that too. And so they were like, we need you to testify against these men. And not only that, but they offered to pay her $6 to testify against these men. And even though she was an accomplice, right? And so her idea was that she's going to go to the hardware store and take this $6, and she was going to buy these saw blades and then go visit her friends in the jail and sneak these saw blades in, right? So that they could escape, right? Of course, she gets caught doing this, right? She totally gets busted. And eventually she ends up never really getting prosecuted for anything. They end up kicking her out of the state of Arizona for 5 years. And I tried to figure out where she went after that, and I could not figure it out. I could not figure out where she went. And I have looked and looked and looked. I should start a Discord for this in case anybody wants to help me look for some of these women. But I have tried to figure out where she went to, and I can't for the life of me. I found so many folks that just seem they're so close, but not really. Do you ever jump on random trains and empty cars?
I guess yeah, random, right? Somewhat. I mean, you've got to make sure you're on a safe ride, but other than that, I think it is kind of, you just find something safe and you get on it.
Yeah.
As I could say with that.
I'm looking at some of these. Does anybody have any questions?
To show you, Abby. Fingers dirty for the pet dog, but anyway, it's all
Yeah. That's really sweet. That's awesome.
the little red hen up there.
That's
You
awesome.
can't see the pin, but it's got a little pin on it as well. It's starting to sprinkle.
I'm from Kansas. And Railcar Rosie here is from Colorado.
Yep, from Aurora, Colorado.
We're from the middle.
Yeah. How about you sucking game?
You feel like the little red hen.
Thank you. I actually did a video just about, they have this filter for like Disney things. Like you can transform yourself into a Disney character. It's like an AI filter. And this dog has like something come out of his rear end area, not its tail. And I was like, this is bad. Like, this is really bad. Why are people using these? They're not even good. They look really bad. But I had to do a video about that. It's like, that's, kind of Disney-like. And I was like, oh gosh. I wish people would, actually support actual artists.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
He's stuck. Go back around the tree.
You're in Canada, you never hear stories like those. There's a lot of them stories. The female traveler that got me the most interested in history was this woman.
Mm-hmm.
This is Hiking Nelly, and I have been obsessed with her for years, trying to figure out like what put her on the rails and what her story really was. And because she was, if you could see the amount of articles that I've found have followed her for like 40 years. 40 years of news articles of people talking about her as she crossed the country. And the only photo that I found was this one. And I've tried so hard to get a hold of the Historical Society there in Macon, Missouri, where this was taken. Somebody to help me find, like, if there's any other photos from this set, because usually they would take 2 or 3. I would love to see some negatives. But I haven't been able to find anything. That newspaper itself isn't around. Yeah, Hiking Nelly. Or she went by Nellie Cruz was her name. If any of y'all have a newspaper archive account or newspapers.com account, if you put in Hiking Nelly or Nellie Cruz, you'll see tons of articles just pop up about her. And I've been trying to figure out like what exactly it was that set her on the rails. She did a lot to hide that, and part of it makes me feel guilty that I'm trying to figure it out because she tried to hide it so well. You know what I mean? Like I'm breaking this trust that I had with her or something. Where was she from? She was born in St. Louis, I'm pretty sure. She went to school in Atchison, Kansas at a convent. There was a school at a convent there. I do believe her mother worked for the governor of Kansas at the time, possibly in his home. And I do think that that's how she could afford to go to that school. It wasn't a charity school in any way, shape, or form. You had to pay good money to go there. And she was taught piano. She was very intelligent. Very, very intelligent. But yeah, then she left from Atchison, Kansas, traveling, and I know that she was teaching piano lessons for a moment before that, but I can't figure out what happened. Like something happened in her life, and I can't figure out like what that pivotal moment was, and it's been driving me bonkers. And I probably won't ever find out. But I'm gonna keep looking. But yeah, the articles about her are great. They're hilarious. Some of them are hilarious. She was a firecracker. She was intelligent. She liked to tell tall tales, and some of them are the ones that you think are tall tales. A few of them are true, so it makes it hard to really differentiate between things. You have to, research everything as if you believe it, no matter what she says. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it's true. She may have been the governor's daughter. I'm not sure though. And I've checked census records for the governor's home at the time. There's nobody that looks like would have been the right age to have been her mother. I need to start a Discord on this, just upload all the information I have and just see if anybody else has any luck. Because I've been poking at her story for years now. And I've been at a standstill for about 2 years. But I love her. I love it a lot. And she's the reason that I got into history, though, is because to understand a lot of the articles, you really had to understand the full picture. You understand the laws around it, understand what the political climate was, understand what it was like for travelers at the time, what books she would have been reading, what kind of people she would have been seeing. All of it. What was it like at a poorhouse? What was it like to get picked up by the police? What was it like to go to a psych ward? That happened to her like 6 times. She broke out of one of them in Arkansas. And I've been trying real hard to get this lady's records from back then, because it's way, they should be in public domain now. It's way over 100 years. For some of them, or about 100 years. Yeah, we can post it on YouTube. Yeah, well, I've gotten to the point where I'm just kind of at a standstill. Is all. I thought about taking a moment and mapping it out on a map, and then physically following her route and trying to figure out things along the way. Huh?
That giant whiteboard.
Yeah, big whiteboard. One of those CSI investigation things with the string and the.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I think she's great. She's got such a cool story. I don't know. But yeah, folks, I think we're going to upload this later. And I think next time that Rosie and I are talking, we're going to talk about what the crossover is between cowgirls and showgirls and hobos, because that's kind of cool stuff.
Right? the next one will be on YT.
Sure. Yeah, we'll figure that out.
I have
We
the
gotta
yeah,
figure out what
he's
your
yeah,
setup is, and I need to work on my setup too.
he's gonna be going to do some shows, so it's just gonna be me on the property. So I won't be going into town, so I'm gonna have to see if I can get good enough connection to go live on YouTube because TikTok's more finicky with the live stuff, so I'm not quite sure if YouTube will work, you know. I'm gonna see sometime.
I
Probably
tell
this
you
week.
what, like,
Check it out.
I need to update my equipment. After going through some of my stuff and trying to get good, like, audio recordings, I've been trying to just do, like, audio for podcast stuff.
Yeah.
I'm realizing that, like, all of my equipment is way outdated. And I need to figure something out if I'm really going to do this. So,
Our mics are.
um,
We had like some like lapel mics, and they broke. And then I had one, and it sounded like an echo. And so we
yeah.
ended up stopping using that one because we're like, well, I don't think we want to record everything with an echo.
Or it'll sound crackly. All right.
Mhm.
What else
Well,
are you going to do today?
we're gonna go. Well, there's always a lot to do since like we finally have water on the property. Um, they got it like a few weeks ago, so you can take showers on the property now. We got water, so we don't have to go get water. That was one of the things that we had to do, like every other day, was go get water. But I think we just need to go get ice and get food, and then I'm probably gonna. I have a custom painting that I'm working on. I'll probably finish sketching out today. And who knows, a bunch of other stuff that needs to be fixed, sewed up. Your pillows that you made me, one of them needs to be stitched up. Or no, both of them need to be stitched up. They've got some holes in it. I'm sure it's not because of Hobo kicking them around or anything like that. He was the culprit.
No, that couldn't have been a thing. Oh,
What do
hey,
you think?
thanks. I'm
You and Dennis.
yeah, yeah. Oh, Denny. Oh, Denny. Oh, Denny. Um, one thing we didn't talk about that maybe we should have, though, and I'm just now thinking of it, because we talked about this a couple of times. Is remember going through them old articles, and we would see over and over again that those old female hobos, especially going into the 20s, would come out and they would be dressed like men while riding, and they would mail forward their
Yes.
really nice gowns and female attire ahead of them to the post office where they were going to look for work at, so that they could do secretarial jobs and nursing jobs and stuff like that. I thought that was kind of a cool thing that those that those women used to do. Very resourceful.
Mhm.
I mean, because otherwise your stuff's getting wet and ruined.
Yeah. And you couldn't carry all of that. Like those were big outfits back then. They weren't tiny. They were heavy cotton outfits. That's what they were.
Yeah, especially if you're the further back you go, because you're talking layers.
Yeah. Everything is layered.
Yeah,
To keep it down and where it needs to be, everything is layered up. Yeah.
I bet if I look hard enough, I can find an account or two of some female actresses and showgirls and stuff that are writing that way and are doing the same with their
Oh
costume.
yeah.
Because that stuff, again, too much to travel with. I bet that's the thing. I'm going to look for that and see if I
It
can
wasn't
find any accounts.
to get a showgirl outfit either. You know, you wouldn't want to get that all ruined and dirty. You want it to look pretty and perfect when you're going to do whatever you need to go do.
Yeah, it's hard to find those accounts, but I might be able to pull something up. I but I imagine whether or not I find those accounts, it would make sense that that would be the thing that they do.
I'm sure they as well didn't want most people to know that they were riding the rods as males and then, going and, doing their shows or whatnot other places. I'm sure they were very hidden about that.
Right. No, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I enjoy I enjoy kind of thinking about that whole crossover there. I feel like there's definitely a lot of hobo-like lifestyle just amongst um the cattle rustling and stuff like that. That whole lifestyle. I mean, you're following along with a herd, but you're sleeping under the stars, or you're wandering, traveling from place to place. It's one of those things, so it only makes sense that the same kind of people would gravitate towards it. You know, same time period, same everything. Um, in a lot of them towns, especially when you're talking about those mining towns out in the Wild West, um, those folks were heavily dependent on labor from the rails, as far as like the mining towns goes and stuff like that. So you had a huge amount of folks that were unionized folks riding the rails, like the wobblies and whatnot. So you'd have a very unionized presence in a lot of those towns, especially towards your neck of the woods, Colorado. We talk about things like the Ludlow massacre that happened. Man, that's a
I had
scary
no
one.
idea about that until I started like traveling. That was a part of Colorado's history I did not know about. I was not taught. And I would like to say that Colorado is very per- progressive when it comes to school education than some places. You know what I mean? And
It's
I
hard
feel
to get parents to sign on to teaching their kids about how the U.S. government sent a literal armored car with machine lined on top of it just to kill workers.
And I mean, my mom didn't even want me to go to, yeah, well, we had a science class about evolution. She signed me out of that class.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, I can imagine, even my
Yeah.
mom would have been
I
like,
mean, the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, that's the same folks that made the Bull Moose special in West Virginia, which was the armored train that was loaded that way that they would roll through mining camps. They also made an armored car in Colorado that was called the Death Express. So you can't say they didn't know what that was going to be used for.
yeah, Jen, I've worn men's clothing on the rails, and like I wouldn't say it's all for like protection from men, but it's also because of like getting on a train with a skirt is dangerous. Flowing fabrics can be easily caught on stuff, and so it's generally just safer as well to ride the rods in pants and not have to worry of any fabrics getting caught on anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I was. I would have some of them really lightweight, like broomstick style skirts that would dry real fast in my pack. I could wear around town,
Hmm.
but for the most part, I'd wear my overalls.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always just for a while I just wore like some pants, and now I wear suspenders and usually
Yeah,
pants. I don't have
and
my
even though I wasn't worried about the same kind of vagrancy laws or the white slavery panic anymore while I was traveling, you would still worry about, traveling alone, say at night. And if you wore baggy clothes and wore more clothes that made you look male, especially from a distance or in the dark, yeah, that also kind of added to your safety.
really.
You're less likely to get assaulted if you looked like a male from a distance.
Yeah, I've had so many people while I was on the road, like I've said, be like, excuse me, sir. And then I'll walk up and I'm like, hello. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I don't really care. Like doesn't matter to me.
Yeah. Yep. Alright. Alright, folks, we're gonna upload this on somewhere, and I will let you know. We're gonna let old Rosie go.
Eventually, so we can do this on YT and go live. That'd be fun. But
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna go do a bunch of stuff today.
Alright. Yeah, me too. I'm gonna deep clean my house.
Ooh, that's fun.
That's what I'm doing today.
I get to when I deep clean stuff, and it takes all day long.
I've been steam cleaning my carpets. It's been epic.
Oh, that's fun. In the heat too?
It's been epic.
Ooh, fun. Fun.
Alright, I'll talk to you later. I'm gonna sign off.
Thank y'all.